Zoom recording. Okay, so let's finish off our conversation about John Locke. So just to recap what we did yesterday, right? Locke, there he is. He was in fact born and he did in fact die. He is an empiricist, right? Remember, the big debate of this period is between the rationalists and the empiricists. And this is a debate in epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge. Knowledge is true justified belief, and the question here really concerns justification. What gives us reason to believe in the things we do? Hang on one second, let me... So the idea then is that we're looking at, in the modern period, this central question of epistemology. What justifies our knowledge? Remember, this is the period that gives us the scientific revolution that overthrows so much traditional belief, so much dogma, that these questions about knowledge are just first and foremost in the cultural mind, right? The rationalists say that the justification for all of our knowledge is human reason. The empiricists, on the other hand, are saying that no, it's not reason, it's the senses, right? We looked last time at the father of rationalism, Descartes, and we saw that in order for the rationalist project to work, right, to have this sort of deductive top-down reasoning, the first truths have to be necessary, right? They have to in some way have first principles that they can argue from, or else it gives rise to an infinite regress. So Locke, being an empiricist, starts by going on the attack. He undermines this notion of innate ideas. He gives us a couple of arguments, right? First of all, that there are no universal ideas. And second, even if there was, it wouldn't do necessarily what the rationalists need to do. He now has to do the hard work. He now has to set up an empiricist epistemology which restores all human knowledge, which founds and grounds all human knowledge. And so he starts with the concept of ideas, right? And as an empiricist, where are these ideas coming from? They have to come from observation. But for him, the notion of observation is twofold. There's sensation, observation of the external world, and reflection, observation of the internal world, the mind observing itself, right? We start as a blank slate, and then we are written upon by the chalk of experience, right? He argues that there are simple and complex ideas. What we observe when we observe the world is a set of simple ideas. And what he means here by idea is in our mind, right? So when we see a complex idea, something like the computer in front of you, you don't see the computer in front of you and then, sort of take it down into pieces. No, we see all the pieces, which we then assemble into the complex idea. So the simple ideas would be things like solid, silver, cold, rectangular, hard, right? And what the senses take in are these simple ideas, which the mind then, as an activity, combines into the objects we see. So where do these simple ideas come from? They aren't supplied to the mind in a pre-existing way. They have to come in through the senses. The mind can neither make nor destroy them. It can simply receive them from experience. And so here's where we left it off yesterday. Can you imagine what it would be like to have a sixth sense? Can you imagine a color you haven't seen? Can you see it in your mind without seeing it with your eyes? And so this is where we'll pick up. In chapter 3, he says, let's look at these ideas. Turns out we can divide them into two classes. Some of these ideas come in just through a single sense. Others come in through multiple senses, right? So of the ideas that come in through the senses, right, we have to distinguish between them because in a couple of minutes we'll see there's an important lesson that comes from that separation of classes. And he says, first, there are some ideas which have admittance only through one sense, which is peculiarly adapted to receive them, thus light and colors as white, red, yellow, blue, with their several degrees or shades and mixtures as green, scarlet, purple, sea green, and the rest come in only by the eyes. So the idea here is you have 5 senses, and there are particular things that each sense is uniquely set up in order to take from the world and convert into ideas. So in the case of your eyes, light and dark, different colors, these are ideas that come in just through one sense. He says what's interesting is that most of these simple ideas, unlike the colors, don't have scarlet, sea green, not Kelly green. He's a Crayola box of crayons, right? For colors, what's so interesting is we do label these very specific shades. But what's strange is for most of our basic ideas, the ideas that come in through just one sense, we don't have a name at all. He says, for example, consider smells, right? The variety of smells, which are as many, almost if not more, than species of bodies in the world, most of them want names. Sweet and stinking commonly serve our term for these ideas, which in effect is little more than to call them pleasing or displeasing. Though the smell, that should be smell, not small, the smell of a rose and a violet, both sweet, are very distinct ideas. So we'll have categories of smells, right? But those tend to just be our reaction to the smell. It's not an actual name of the smell itself, right? Usually we say, well, it smells like, and then we name the complex object. Whereas with colors, we have specific names for them. With smells, he says, isn't it weird that we don't actually label the smells in the same way as we do the colors? The title of this slide, of course, is an old joke. My dog has no nose. Oh, how does it smell? Terrible. Yes, this is the advantage of Zoom. You don't hear the groans. Chapter 5 of simple ideas of more than one sense. So while there are certain sensations, right? Color, smell, texture, which comes in only through one sense, right? There are others that are accessible to multiple senses. Space or extension, figure, rest, and motion. For these make perceivable impressions both on the eyes and touch. And we can receive and convey into our minds the ideas of extension, figure, motion, and rest of bodies, both by seeing and feeling. But having occasion to speak more large on these in another place, I only enumerate here. So what Locke is doing is sort of putting down a marker right now. I'm not telling you why, but hint, hint, it's going to be important, and it will be. The idea here is there are certain things about the world that come to us just through certain senses that are uniquely set up to detect them, but there are other elements of the world that come in through multiple senses. Why is this going to be important? Well, let's think about this for a minute. If you hear something from one person, Cole tells me something, am I going to believe it? You know how he is, right? But now, if I know, he hasn't been talking to Sasha this week, and I hear the same thing from her, what am I now thinking? There must be something to that. Or it was on Facebook, one of the two, right? The point is, if you get the same information from two different sources, that seems important. So let's just put a pin in that and put that off to the side. Oh. Other considerations concerning simple ideas. He says, and this is interesting, all simple ideas are positive ideas. That is, They are ideas unto themselves. So a painter needs both white and black. See one of these ideas as the lack of an idea. So each one is defined in a certain sense unto itself. It's defined as its own independent idea. It's not defined as, with the other idea as prior as the lack of it. So he says, thus the ideas of heat and cold, light and darkness, white and black, motion and rest are equally clear and positive ideas in the mind, though perhaps some of their causes which produce them are barely privations in the subject from which our senses derive these ideas. So the idea here is we don't think of cold as the lack of heat. We don't think of dark as the lack of light. That may be true, but the privation, the lack of something, doesn't give rise to the idea. The idea isn't, in a certain sense, sublimated under the umbrella of it. It is its own full-blown idea. So note the distinction here, right? Epistemology and metaphysics, right? It's not a question of which one's real and this giving rise to that. At one point, he talks about, a shadow. Is a shadow a thing? Well, in a sense, it is, right? Even though it's really the lack of light. So the shadow is a privation, but yet we think of it as a thing unto itself, right? And so the idea here is that we have the idea of the shadow, the idea of darkness, independent of what it's a lack of. So it's not that one of these ideas is more important than the other and defines it as the negation of the first. They are their own ideas. So here we're going to draw a distinction. Ideas in the mind, qualities in bodies. Notice what move we're now making, right? We are going from ideas in the mind, that is epistemology, to qualities in bodies, that is, we're making the move from epistemology to metaphysics, right? Again, this is the hallmark. You'll get tired of me saying this. This is the hallmark of the modern period. Epistemology first, metaphysics comes out of it. Here's what he says. Whatever the mind perceives in itself or is the immediate object of perception, thought, or understanding, that I call an idea. And the power to produce any idea in our mind, I call a quality of the subject in which the power is. Thus, a snowball, having the power to produce in us the ideas of white, cold, and round, the power to produce those ideas in us as they are in the snowball, I call qualities. And as they are sensations or perceptions in our understandings, I call them ideas, which ideas, if I speak of sometimes as in the things themselves, I would understand to mean those qualities in the objects that produce them. So you have a snowball, right? That snowball has power. What do we mean by power? Power is the ability to influence something else, right? So in this case, the power is the ability to create ideas in our mind. The snowball has the power to create in your mind the idea white, cold, round. So those things appear in the mind, not from some act internal to the mind, but the power of the snowball actually affects your mind. And so now we see the central question of metaphysics rearing its head. How do I know that the world out there resembles my internal experience of it? So the question here, framed in Locke's notions, is what ideas are qualities of the bodies themselves? So I look at that snowball. I have the idea of white, cold, round. Is that because the snowball is white, cold, and round? Or is it just that it has the power to make me think that? Right? Because things can have the power to create ideas that don't have them themselves. Right? 6 feet tall, full head of hair, slender. I've just put those ideas in your mind. I sadly resemble none of those, right? The idea here is that things can have the power to create ideas. And the question is, what things actually have those powers? And the things that have the powers, do they actually instantiate the properties themselves? Are those qualities in the body, or do they just have the ability to make you think it? And so here we get the big payoff. This is one of the central elements that we need to understand in Locke. One of the most important contributions he has to philosophy is his distinction between primary and secondary qualities. He says, qualities thus considered in bodies are, first, such as are utterly inseparable from the body in whatever state it is. These I call original or primary qualities of body, which I think we may observe to produce simple ideas in us, namely solidity, extension, figure, motion or rest, and number. So the primary qualities are those that cannot be stripped away from the body no matter what state it's in, right? Go back to Descartes with the wax, right? The idea is Descartes was saying, I could change all of its properties. It's still the same wax. Locke is saying, time out. We need to divide our properties into two parts. They're the primary ones, and those are the ones he's going to say are metaphysically real. Those are the ideas you get in your head because they are actually in the body. And they are the ones, he says, that are utterly inseparable from the body in whatever state it is. On the other hand, secondly, such qualities in which truth are nothing in the objects themselves, but power to produce various sensations in us, by their primary qualities, i.e. bulk, figure, texture, motions that are in sensible parts, as colors, sounds, tastes, etc. I call these secondary qualities. So the primary qualities are the qualities of body that can't be separated from the body no matter what. And those, he wants to say, are actually real. On the other hand, secondary qualities are qualities that are in your idea of the thing, but aren't in the thing themselves. Color, sound, taste, none of this is real. This is just in your mental representation of it. So if you look at a lemon, what color is it? That, Locke would say, is a trick question. The image in your mind of the lemon is yellow. Is the lemon really yellow? No. Locke is saying that the world is not in color. Color is not real outside of your mind. The world of color is purely internal. Now, it is in your mind because these objects do have the power to create those basic ideas when you form your complex ideas of a lemon. Yellow, sour, oblong, bumpy, right? These are all properties of lemons, but they are not real properties of real lemons. They are properties of our ideas of lemon. Is a lemon solid before you make the lemonade? Yes, that's a real property of the lemon. Is it extended? That is, does it take up space? Yes. Is that one lemon? That's one lemon. That's a fact of the world. Whether it's one lemon or two lemons, that's a metaphysical truth of the world. Those are real. Those are the primary qualities. Did you just throw that lemon at me? Well, the lemon flew across the room. That's a fact of the world. That's a metaphysical claim. that the lemon is yellow, sour, and bumpy and oblong, those are not. Those are just parts of your idea of, we have these simple ideas, but not every, also, well, we'll do it this way. We have these simple ideas. They do all come in through the senses. They are all part of our complex understanding of the lemon, but they don't equally apply to the real lemon itself. Those that come in through multiple senses, those are real. In the same way that if I hear Cole and then Sasha both tell me the same information, I probably have good reason to think it's probably true, right? In the same way, if I have two different senses tell me the same thing about this lemon, I have good reason to think that quality is actually in the lemon. On the other hand, if I get a simple idea from the lemon that comes in only through one sense, that doesn't mean that the quality is part of the lemon. It just means that the lemon has the power to induce that quality within me. In the same way that, say, you know, if you have a good actor can make you feel very sad. It doesn't mean that the actor is sad. The actor just has the power to evoke pity from the audience. The lemon isn't really yellow. It just has the ability to make its audience think yellow. And so again, hammering on this point that we'll hammer on all semester, notice what Locke is doing. Epistemology first, metaphysics comes out of it. Is this distinction making sense between primary and secondary qualities? Because for Locke, this is a big, big deal. Because, you know, the question is, how do I know what's in my mind in any way resembles the world? Right? We've all played with this metaphysical puzzle, right? Dude, how do I know that when you see yellow and I see yellow, we're both seeing the same yellow? Whoa, that's deep. What's Locke saying? Locke is saying there is no yellow other than the seeing of. So, notice the distinction here. Sensation and reality. These are two things that are different. The world gives rise to the sensations which put ideas in the mind. But there is a distinction, Locke says, between this primary secondary quality distinction. Notice what it entails. It entails that Locke is a metaphysical dualist. Remember what dualism is. Metaphysical dualism is the view that reality is made up of two completely different kinds of stuff. There is physical, material stuff, and there is mental, ideal soul stuff. There's body and there's mind, and they're different categories. They're different kinds of things, right? Notice what Locke does with this primary secondary quality distinction is he is saying that there is a real world of material objects and it has certain properties, and then there is the world of ideas and it has different properties than the material world. That's not to say the material world doesn't have the power to give rise to those ideas. It does, but the idea is different from the thing. How is it? Remember, Locke is not a philosopher by trade because you couldn't be a philosopher by trade. He had a day job. He was a doctor. And so he's going to do a little bit of the anatomy here, right? He's trying to figure out how do the senses work, right? How is it that a lemon can make us think yellow? How can a lemon make us think sour? How can a lemon make us think bumpy? Well, he says it has to be because that power is conveyed from one thing to another thing. And the only way to get from one thing to another thing is to send something there, right? When I smell the lemon and it smells lemony, again, we don't have good smell words. excuse me, it must be that that power is in some way related thing, right? Empiricists are going to want to latch onto some scientific explanation. So when I see yellow, it must be that the lemon gives off a yellow thing. What is that thing? Well, you got to remember when he's writing and who he knows. Isaac Newton. Newton has a theory of light. It's the corpuscular theory. That is, light is made up of particles. And Newton was very famous for his work on optics, specifically with the prism. It was Newton who taught us that white light isn't primary, that white light is actually composite. It's made up of light of all the different colors. And so the Newtonian theory of light, which Locke knew perfectly well, was that there are these little corpuscles, these little particles of yellow light, these little particles of blue light, these little particles of orange light. And when you put all these particles together in a cluster, you get white light. So when we say that a lemon is yellow, the reason is that that lemon reflects back, gives off, it emits these yellow particles that our mind takes in and interprets. So it's not that the lemon is yellow, it's that the lemon emits yellow particles. Well, in the same way, it must be that there are these little tiny, they're so small that we don't see them, particles that affect the other senses as well. There must be sour particles. So that when the lemon hits our tongue, right, what happens is some of those sour particles get taken up by the tongue and we then taste sour. And so what we have here is a very sort of materialist picture of sensation. We are interacting with our environment by receiving through the senses all of these sort of emitted particles. Interesting. It's a small little section, and then he sort of excuses himself for doing natural philosophy. Natural philosophy was the term for science back then. And he says, look, we can tell that these secondary qualities aren't real because there are times when those particles won't be emitted, but the thing is still what it is, right? This is the section where he talks about porphyry, which is just another name for quartz. He says, if you take a piece of quartz, right, there's white quartz, there's rose quartz, right? You look at it in the light, it has a color. But in the dark, it doesn't have color. But what does it have? It's still solid. It still has its shape, right? Those things, the primary qualities, are there in the light, are there in the dark, right? It is the same rock. The primary qualities are real. And then he says, this picture allows us to understand another really weird problem for the empiricist. Okay, if you've never tried this, this is a really cool thing. Take 3 buckets, fill each one with water. Fill the one on the left with really hot water. Fill the one on the right with ice water. And then fill the one in the middle with lukewarm water. Then take your hands, put it in the 2 outside buckets. Put your left hand in the hot water, your right hand in the cold water. Let them stay there for about 45 seconds. Then pull them out and then immediately plunge them both into the middle bucket. What's weird is the hands will feel the same water completely differently. Right? The hand that was in the hot water will think, oh my God, this water is so cold. The water that was in the cold will say, oh my God, this water is so hot, even though it's the same water. Right? So how can the same water be both hot and cold? If truth comes to us through our senses, then it seems like we have some sort of problem for the empiricist here, right? And so Locke says, okay, this is a challenge, but we can now understand it. If heat and cold come to us through these particles, what I'm really judging is a comparison. How many heat particles are coming into my left hand, how many heat particles are coming in, or is both hot and cold, which seems to be a contradiction, which is created by my senses. No, what I'm saying is, oh, fewer heat particles are coming into my left hand than there used to be, and more heat particles are coming into my right hand than used to be. So, ta-da! Once we have this particulate understanding of sensation, with respect to the secondary qualities, the problem disappears. It's unfortunate that philosophers don't have lab sections, because this would be a cool one to do. So let's jump ahead to chapter 12. So up until now, he's been dealing with simple ideas, right? The basic components through which we comprise the world. But what happens is we don't just see a whole bunch of simple ideas. We see complex ideas. Right now you're thinking, I'm looking at my computer. Look up. I'm looking at the ceiling. Look down. I'm looking at my feet, right? The idea here is we don't just collect simple ideas. We see things. We see objects. How? Well, he says this. With simple ideas, the mind is passive, right? That is, leaves in motion. But what we can do with those is put them together. So in order to see a lemon, you don't just passively sit there and lemon pops into your mind. Yellow pops into your mind, bumpy pops into your mind, oblong, single, at rest. All of these things do pop into your mind, but it's now an active activity. I guess all activities are active. That makes them activities. It's an active process of the mind that creates the complex idea lemon. So once the mind has passively received ideas, it now has power over them. And there are three powers that your mind has with respect to simple ideas, Locke argues. The first one, and the most common one, is combination. You can take these simple ideas and join them together into an object. That's what you do when you perceive a lemon. There is an activity of the mind that takes the simple ideas and forms the complex idea. But what's fun is you don't just have to do it with the simple ideas that you've had at other times and import them into new combinations. Let's think about purple lemons. Let's think about orange lemons with blue polka dots. Let's think about plaid lemons. Plemons, right? The point is, we've never seen a plaid lemon, but yet you guys are probably all thinking about one right now, right? The idea here is, and what's interesting about plaid lemons, they are hard as marble and ice cold, right? The idea is, oh my God, notice what's now in your head. This weird, bizarre thing that you'd never even thought of before. That's what's really cool about the power of combination. Once you have the simple ideas, you can import them and combine them in any which way. That's what our mind does when we perceive objects, and it's what we do with the imagination. The second power that the mind has is it can take two ideas and not combine them. It can just put them next to each other but not touching. So Steve is wearing a yellow shirt. Yellow like a lemon? Well, I can think about lemons and they're yellow. I can think about the shirt and it's yellow, and I can compare them, right? Green like grass or green like the inside of an avocado? Ooh, sea green, Kelly green, hunter green, right? You can compare these all in your mind, right? The idea here is what we're doing is not combining these ideas, we're comparing them. And the third power we have, and this one is going to be important for Locke when he gets this philosophy of language, is abstraction. That is, we can separate the idea from all the other ideas with which it's usually associated. So, you know, red, hot. Well, no. I'm just thinking about redness now, right? And so the idea is what we can do is abstract the notion from any sort of physical surrounding or any sort of other combinations we want. So what can the mind do with these simple ideas that it gets? It can combine them, it can compare them, it can abstract them. So once we are able to build up these complex ideas, we now have three radically different elements of the mental landscape. There are modes, there are substances, and there are relations. All of these are species of complex ideas. First, modes I call such complex ideas, which, however compounded, do not contain in them the supposition of subsisting by themselves on or affections of substances, such as are the ideas signified by the words triangle, gratitude, murder. Sounds like a punk band name. Triangle Gratitude Murder, right? The idea here is modes are going to be complex ideas, right? We could say things about murder is wrong. That's true, right? Gratitude is thoughtful. Triangles are interesting. But the idea is, notice while we can say true things about these, and they are complex ideas, they don't have subsistence, right? That is, they don't in and of themselves exist. A triangle isn't a real thing. There may be triangular things, right? Oh, the club sandwich was cut into 4 triangles. So something can be triangular, but yet we could talk about triangles and they have properties, right? The internal angles add to right angles. So there are truths about triangles, even though triangles aren't themselves subsistent entities. These he's going to call modes, right? So now, the murder isn't a thing unto itself, right? But it is a mode in which something exists. So he's going to say we need to distinguish even further between simple versus mixed modes. A simple mode is just something that is a mode unto itself. And the example here he says is a dozen or a score. All right? A dozen is 12, right? Dozens don't just exist. There's a dozen donuts or a dozen eggs, right? So the idea here is it is a mode. It doesn't have independent subsistence, but it is simple in terms of what it is. Then there are mixed modes. Beauty and theft are the examples he gives. So what makes something beautiful? Well, it has to be a combination of line, a combination of color, right? So if I talk about a beautiful picture, there are a lot of elements that go into. So beauty itself, we can talk about as, in essence, an abstract thing. So it's a mode, right? But because it doesn't exist, oh, sorry, didn't mean to step on that beauty, right? Beauty doesn't subsist. It doesn't have independent existence. Yet it is, he wants to say, a mode that requires a lot of other things to be elements of it, parts of it. It's complex. It's therefore a mixed mode. Substances. The idea of substances are such combinations of simple ideas as are taken to represent distinct particular things subsisting by themselves. Thought and reasoning joined to substance make the ordinary idea of a man. Right? So here's the simple one, right? Modes are these sort of abstract properties that we talk about, right? That we do have nouns for, right? We say a noun is a person, place, or thing. Well, but it's also an idea. Love, right? Or beauty, right? Here, these are the simple nouns. These are the objects. These are the things, right? Substances, right? And he says they come in two flavors, single and collective. So single substances, I could think of a man or a sheep. But then I can think of collective substances, an army or a flock, right? And I can, think of an army as having properties. It's an object, right? The army advanced, or the army was decimated, right? Or the army lost its morale. Notice what we're saying here is we are attributing properties to a collective that may or may not hold to the individuals within the collective, right? So the idea here is he wants to say that there are both single and collective substances. The last of complex ideas is that we call relation, which consists in the consideration and comparing of one idea with another. I believe we shall find, if we rarely observe the origins of our notions, that even the most abstruse ideas, however remote they may stem from our sense or from any operation of our own minds, are yet only such as the understanding frames to itself by repeating and joining together ideas that it had either from objects of sense or from its own operations about them. So the idea here, these relations, are important for Locke because what he's doing at this point is answering a challenge from the rationalist. The rationalist is going to say, okay, the empiricists love the easy cases. Is there a lemon? Yeah, see, there's a lemon. The hard cases for empiricists are, what about the deep ideas we think about and discuss that seemingly aren't open to direct observation? What about the philosophical questions? What about the philosophical notions that seem like they're meaningful, seem like they're real, but aren't the result of simple observation? Time. Do you see time? Do you smell time? Do you taste time? Well, okay, that's a different time. The point is, right, these aren't things that are, time is not something that's directly observable. How about space? Do you see space? How about infinity? Is it even possible to observe infinity? Yet, we talk about infinity, right? There are really, why, yes, there are. How many of them? Countless numbers, right? The idea here is the concept of infinity is clearly something we want in our philosophical discourse. If you're going to be an empiricist, how are you even going to make sense of it? You can't even join the philosophical game. So if you're going to be an empiricist, you need to be able to make sense of infinity despite the fact that it's inherently unobservable. God? Do you smell God? How about the soul? How about the self? Right? So the idea here is Locke giving us a philosophical account of what's real that seems to run into trouble the instant you hit anything that's philosophically interesting. Okay. So this is a response to the rationalist challenge that has to be taken up. Descartes holds that there are ideas in his mind that he could not have produced, right? Think back to his anthropomorphic argument for the existence of God, right? It hinges on the idea that this idea is more perfect than I am, so I couldn't have created this idea. I'm finite. How could I create an infinite idea, right? So the idea here is that Descartes is saying there are some ideas, Locke, that I can't have created myself. My senses ain't going to get them for me, and yet they are philosophically the most interesting. Doesn't this undermine all of empiricism? Empiricism makes it impossible to do philosophy. So you've just constructed a philosophy that eliminates the possibility of philosophy. Oh, he's got a challenge. The easy cases are easy. What about the hard cases? Locke has to show how he can construct these notions: time, space, infinity, God, soul, self. How can you construct them empirically? If he can't do it, he loses the game. Ooh, now it's getting exciting. Okay. He hinges it on metaphysical dualism, right? And we saw this previously in Descartes. Descartes is also a dualist, right? Descartes thinks there is mind and there is body, right? He says that we have an abstract notion of body and just as clear an abstract notion of soul. And what he does, interestingly, is give an argument that's sort of like Descartes' cogito. I think, therefore I am. But he inverts it in a really clever way. The same thing happens concerning the operations of the mind, namely thinking, reasoning, fearing, etc., which we can conclude not to subsist of themselves, nor apprehending how they can belong to a body or be produced by it. We're apt to think these actions of some other substance, which we call spirit. Yet, by this, it's evident that having no other idea or notion of matter, but something in which those many sensible qualities which affect our senses do subsist, by supposing a substance in which thinking, knowing, doubting, and a power of moving, etc., do subsist, we have as clear a notion of body. So the idea is this, right? Remember, we have both sensation and reflection. Both of these are observations for Locke. And I can reflect, right? That is, I can look at the mind at work. I can watch the mind do what the mind does. And when I watch the mind do what the mind does, what do I see it doing? Thinking, reasoning, fearing, right? Doubting, knowing, deriving. Is my body doing that? And notice that he makes almost the same move as Descartes makes, right? Which is, these are actions. Actions require an actor, an agent to do them. And he says, is knowing part of my body? No. Oh, then there has to be something else that's doing it. That's a part of me. And so he says, I have from perception, from the external way of perceiving, a sense of my body. And that one's going to be clear. But in the same way, I have reflection, which is the internal perception. And that gives me just as clear a notion of mind. So the notion of spirit, remember, spirit, mind, soul, all mean exactly the same thing for them. So how do we have this idea of soul? Well, the soul is the mind. The mind thinks. I perceive myself thinking, therefore I'm a thinking thing. But I'm an embodied thinking thing, not a disembodied floating thinking thing. And so he says, an empiricist can buy in to metaphysical dualism. In fact, for an empiricist, it seems common sense. This is not a threat. It's easily disposed of. What about the notion of self? And this is a more complicated one. Self is that conscious thinking thing. Again, notice the Cartesian language here. Whatever substance made up of, whether spiritual, material, simple, compounded, it matters not, which is sensible or conscious of pleasure and pain, capable of happiness or misery, and so is concerned for itself as far as that consciousness extends. Thus, everyone finds that, while comprehended under that consciousness, the little finger is as much a part of himself as what is must so. So the idea here is your body part of yourself? Yes. Right? Is your little finger a part of you? Yes. Why? Because you perceive it. And so it's the perception that is really the key element of you, right? Because what would happen if you were in an accident and you lost your little finger? Is your self gone? Is that finger you? No. You now just have 3 fingers and a thumb. Right? So the idea here is that the you is not in the material. It's in the consciousness. But that consciousness allows you to perceive the body. But it's that consciousness. And so we really are, in a certain sense, moving back towards a very Cartesian picture, right? Where the self really is in the mind. He says, this may show us in what personal identity consists. Not in the identity of substance, but, as I have said, in the identity of consciousness. Queensborough agree, then they are the same person. If the same Socrates waking and sleeping do not partake of the same consciousness, Socrates waking and Socrates sleeping is not the same person. And so he answers the question, is it a brain transplant or a body transplant? So let's say I took Matt and Sasha and switched their brains. So I now look at the body that had belonged to Matt, but now has the brain of Sasha. Is that Matt with Sasha's brain, or is that Sasha with Matt's body? Well, Locke says there's an answer to that. Wherever the mind is, that's where the self is. So if we take the brain and the mind to be interrelated, right, what he's saying is if the present mayor of Queensborough happens to be the reincarnation of Socrates and remembers the whole life of Socrates, that is, has Socrates' mind, then the mayor of Queensborough is Socrates.
So does he believe in reincarnation?
No, he doesn't. He's
just curious.
He's trying to come up with a funny, silly example here. But the idea is that you are your memories, you are your experiences, you are your consciousness. If we were able to, if you had, say, an episode where you lost all memories, you would have, in fact, lost yourself. You would be a different self. Even though you would be a continuous material object through time, if you don't have the same mind, you're not the same person. And he says, if you want evidence of this, he moves from metaphysics and epistemology now into questions of ethics, right? He asks this question in terms of moral responsibility, right? The idea here is, suppose we have Socrates awake, who is just a kind, wonderful person. But Socrates, when he's asleep, thrashes around or sleepwalks, right? And let's say he not only sleepwalks, he sleepwalks with a knife and, murders someone. Is waking Socrates now guilty of that murder? Well, if waking Socrates doesn't remember it, has no sense of it, right? The idea is we'd want to say, no, there is no moral responsibility there, because the responsibility has to do with the consciousness. And if you do things, let's say in an altered consciousness that you're not responsible for inducing, right? Then you're not responsible for it. Well, that seems to say that selfhood is related to consciousness. So here's the punchline. Locke ends up metaphysically exactly where Descartes left us. The soul is the seat of the self, not the body, despite taking a very contrary epistemological route to get there. So again, the hallmark of the modern period is epistemology first, metaphysics comes out of it. What we see in Locke and Descartes are completely different epistemologies, competing, contrasting epistemologies, and yet, what do they both pull out of it? The same exact metaphysic. And so this is what we will simply refer to for the rest of the semester as the chart. We are going to fill this in with figures as we roll. Along the top, you see the epistemological views that are in contrast. Along the side, you see the metaphysical. Dualism is the view that there are two different elements to reality. Monism is that there's one. Rationalism is that the justification for all human knowledge is reason. Empiricism is that the justification for all human knowledge is sense perception. We see that Descartes is a rationalist dualist. Locke is an empiricist dualist. Is everyone a dualist? No. Next time, what we'll do is look at Spinoza. So I want you to read the first book of the Ethics, and I want you to think, where on this chart should you put Spinoza? So that's your question for next time. Please do the reading, write up a reflection, and we will meet for that conversation then on Friday.
See you.
Thank you,
Okay.
Steve.
Thank you.
Sorry about the phone call in the middle. Welcome to Corona World, Zoom land. It's a weird place.
It really is.
Yes.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Adios.